had just had a request in on the Keynes neoclassical debate. Yeah, so the basic idea is if you look at Keynes versus neoclassical economics, the basic idea is that neoclassical economists believe that under the right circumstances, an economy can self-stabilise, so it can return to some sort of stable point, some sort of equilibrium, without the need for government intervention. Keynesian economists argue that these circumstances aren't likely to be true, and that therefore the government needs to intervene in order for an economy to stabilise. So that's your basic idea. Neoclassical economists believe that you can that either the market does work or it can be made to work. Such that in the event of some sort of shock, the economy sorts itself out without any need for further government intervention. Keynesians believe that that's not going to happen, and that therefore the government needs to control aggregate demand. So if we take an example of how that's supposed to work, then the standard analysis is some sort of downward shock, some sort of recession. If we say so, what is it? What is it that classical economists argue? They say, well, okay, let's suppose that this is real GDP. That's the price level. Let's suppose that is the NERU. So remember, this is GDP. So low unemployment is over here. High unemployment is over here. And let's suppose that we take some sort of short-run aggregate supply function like that, which is based on the individual marginal cost curves of firms in the economy. So that's why it slopes upwards, because diminishing returns. There's aggregate demand. There's point A. There's price level PL1. So what do neoclassical economists argue if there's a fall in aggregate demand? They see. Let's suppose there's some sort of external shock, an exogenous shock that reduces aggregate demand to AD2. Initially, output falls. So we're at Y2. Here we are at point B, and unemployment's gone up. Unemployment is now above the area. There are high levels of unemployment. So the point is, what happens once we've reached point B? The question is what happens next. And if you're a neoclassical economist, then what you believe is that at point B, unemployment is above the NERU. And therefore, workers don't have very much power. They're quite weak. Firms can resist pay claims quite easily, and as a result of which, because unemployment is so high, it's likely that wages are going to be driven down in the pay bargaining system. So wages are likely to fall. As a result of that, firms' costs start to fall. And as a result of that, it shifts short-run aggregate supply. It shifts down and out. So short-run aggregate supply is higher, or however we want to see that. At a given level of GDP, costs are lower. That's based on marginal costs. There's some marginal cost in the economy. So short-run aggregate supply, is gradually extends, shifts rather. And as a result of that, what starts to happen is that the price level is driven down. So the price level falls, PL3, PL4, PL5, PL6, whatever. We end up here at PL6. And as the price level falls, that creates an extension in aggregate demand. That's your increase in aggregate demand there. We move along this new AD2. So saying that leads to a decrease in the price level, and the decrease in price level leads to an increase in aggregate demand. And that happens because of, one, the real balance effect. What that means is that the real value, because price level is lower, the real value of savings is higher. Consumers have more wealth, effectively. Secondly, there is the trade effect, which is that, remember, aggregate demand isn't consumption. It's C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So the trade effect means that UK prices are lower, so we'll sell more exports. And then there's the real money supply effect, or the interest rate effect, that has various names. The first point, where we said that the real value of savings for consumers is higher, is also true for banks. Because the price levels are lower, the real value of the money supply is greater. Banks will want to lend that, so it's likely that interest rates are going to go down. So therefore, the same is true for in reverse. So the whole thing. So if it was the case, that aggregate demand, initially rose to AD3 or whatever, we'd initially go to point D. Wages and costs would increase, pushing up prices, and we'd end up there at E. Therefore, in the long run, according to neoclassical economists, the economy self-stabilizes. It returns to the NERU, but with a different price level. So as far as they're concerned, the long-run aggregate supply schedule is vertical, like that. So But this rests on a couple of key assumptions. And these are factor market flexibility, especially factor market or labour market flexibility, and so wages are not sticky, and secondly, product market flexibility. So what we're saying is that prices aren't sticky either. So Keynesians would say, well, I'm afraid that's all very lovely, but in theory, but in the real world, it's simply not going to be true, because although you have assumed that labour markets and product markets flexible, in the real world, they're not going to be. So if you say, well, how do Keynesians see this? They say, well, look, if you take labour markets, then they're not flexible, and they're not flexible for a whole host of reasons: trade union power, national minimum wage, contracts. There's all sorts of reasons, where wages don't simply fall in a recession. And product markets, they're not flexible either. So because of monopoly power, collusive agreements in oligopoly. We looked at the energy sector, and we saw that it's pretty clear that the prices of gas and electricity companies aren't responding to changes in their costs. So they say what's going to happen, therefore, is not, they say, suppose we do have, a neoclassical short-run function like that, and aggregate demand falls from 81 to 82. What they say is, well, look, we go to B, but that whole process, that whole self-stabilising process whereby we end up down here at point C, that's not going to happen. B is the long run, as far as Keynesians are concerned. Unless somebody does something, we go from A to B. So that's why the Keynesian long-run aggregate supply schedule looks like that. Then they say the short run is the long run, in the long run we're all dead, blah, 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 blah. So therefore, what do they say we should do? What Keynesians say is, well, since the economy isn't going to stabilise itself, the government needs to intervene. The government needs to do something. For those of you who watch the Keynes-Hayek rap, the monetary, the fiscal, they're equally correct. So we could use monetary policy. We could decrease interest rates. Which does the usual things that cutting interest rates does. Or we could use QE. Alternatively, we could use fiscal policy. We could increase government spending. We could decrease tax. So generally, Keynesians would prefer to use monetary policy as your first option, because it's more flexible. Whereas fiscal policy, it takes ages to get moving, and also you can't simply change government spending without planning what you're going to spend it on. There's not necessarily that many projects that are shovel ready, as Paul Krugman would call it. So therefore, in other words, instead of allowing the economy to stay at point B, what Keynesians say is we take it from B back to A. All of these things, they increase aggregate demand as a shift, and they simply take us back to where we came from. So that sounds reasonable enough. So why don't neoclassical why don't neoclassical economists like this? Well, they say, well, look, we don't necessarily need to do this. There are ways in which we can get around the problem. But secondly, they say that there is a problem with this, which is that you're going to create distortions. It's a form of government failure. They said that loose monetary policy, low interest rates and quantitative easing and so on, loose monetary policy will simply create the risk of more bubbles. You've got cheap credit, and all we're going to do is end up, for those of you who watch The Big Short, that's exactly what is argued to be, plus deregulation is argued to be one of the causes of the financial crisis back in 2008-9. Is that interest rates, after the dot-com bubble, interest rates stayed too low for too long. Loose fiscal policy, obviously, it leads to a build-up of debt, which creates the risk of crowding out, which neoclassical economists particularly hate because that slows down potential growth. And secondly, obviously, there is a government failure in the form of white elephants, that we simply spend the money somewhere on things that aren't needed. So this is one of the criticisms of Japan's fiscal stimulus, is that although they're just a set of islands, they've got something like the world's 5th largest road network because all they do is build more bloody roads. And also there's a risk of zombies, that all you're doing by supporting demand in the economy, is you are allowing zombie firms, the living dead, you're allowing them to survive and to consume scarce resources that would be better employed elsewhere in the economy. So what do neoclassical economists argue that should be done? They say, well, look, in a recession, you don't engage in expansionary policies. In a recession, so our neoclassical response is in a recession, actually, you keep government finances under control because the economy can stabilise anyway, according to them. That's why you go for austerity, because what you don't want is you don't want large levels of government debt building up. If the economy isn't self-stabilising, they'll say, well, let's attack the problem. They would say Keynesian economics is tackling the symptoms rather than the cause. Let's tackle the underlying problem. The problem then is that wages, labour and product markets aren't fully flexible. Therefore, the neoclassical answer to recession, if there is a recession, they say, well, let's unstick product and labour markets. That's what you're going to try and do. How are we going to unstick product and labour markets? In the case of labour markets, it's all about deregulation, effectively reducing the amount of government controls in those markets. So in the labour markets, what we're going to do is we're going to decrease trade union power, depending on where we are in the world. We're going to decrease or abolish the national minimum wage. We're going to decrease employment rights. So that people can't resist pay cuts. So in the UK, that would be things like 0-hour contracts and that type of stuff. In the case of product markets, to unstick prices, we need to ensure that there is a lot of competition. Well, that can be done by opening up your borders to free trade. It can be done by deregulating markets, to increase contestability. We can privatise and so on. If that works. But in theory, privatisation, will. Oops, not very legible, is it? Privatise. In theory, that can increase competition. So they say the answer is don't stimulate demand because it has side effects. Instead, create a self-stabilising world. When better to try to smash trade unions than in the middle of a recession. So the Keynesian answer to that is, well, this is all going to take a hell of a long time and it's not very fair. Especially your labour market reforms, they're going to increase inequality and so on. Yes, the Keynesian answer is this is all going to take a very long time. In the long run, we're all dead. So therefore, who's right partly depends on where you start. If you look at Greece, 10 years after the financial crisis, unemployment's still 18%. So there isn't much sign that the Greek economy has really self-stabilised very quickly. Meanwhile, in Germany, unemployment's 4 or 5%, something like that. So therefore, US again, unemployment's probably below the area in the US. They've already started to increase interest rates to tackle inflationary pressure. So therefore, much depends on where you start. It's a debate. It's a debate that never ends. So in short, in a recession, Keynesians say, well, look, it's going to take a hell of a long time for this economy to self-stabilise, even if you reform the supply side. Therefore, it's better simply for the government to steer the economy, to take it back to full employment. So therefore, Keynesian says, what's happened is that aggregate demand has fallen, say from 81 to 82. Therefore, what we're going to do is we've got to push it back. Using monetary and fiscal expansion. So we were at Y1, a recession takes us to Y2. The government increases aggregate demand, takes us back. So instead of ABC, we get ABA. That's the Keynesian view. Neoclassical economists, they say that under the right circumstances, we don't need to do that. The economy can self-regulate. The economy gets ABC in terms of the diagram that we did before. You can't. So in other words, AD falls, short and aggregate supply, AD1, AD2. AD falls, AB, blah, 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 blah. Wages and prices fall and takes us to C, meaning that the longer aggregate supply curve is vertical. And that's the fundamental difference between Keynesian and neoclassical economics.